Everyone to the public meeting for the Neighborhood Vision Plan. My name is Joyce Wong. I'm the VP of Community Development here at Midtown. I see a lot of familiar faces on this call, so thank you for joining us this Tuesday evening. And we will be keeping it pretty short and sweet, given that there is a Ward 7 meeting following this from 6 to 8. But what we're hoping to do tonight is keep you in the loop about what's been happening with the Neighborhood Vision Plan. First of all, I would just love to say that other members of the Midtown team are here on this call with us. So that includes Jeff Epstein, our executive director, if you don't mind waving. Joy Carter is here. Adam Allen is with us. He's our AmeriCorps Vista. Rick Barga, who is our new VP of Economic Development. And am I missing anyone else on this call? I believe that's it. Alex Calla, who is our intern. We also have a few board members joining us tonight, so it's great to have you all. Again, thank you so much. What is the Neighborhood Vision Plan for those who are new to this? If we could go to the next slide. Well, for Midtown, it's been about 15 years since we've actually done a master plan for the neighborhood. And so part of this plan is that we are taking into account all of the different plans that are concurrently happening, all the changes that have happened over the last 15, even 5, even 1 year. And what we want to do is we want to create collectively an identity for Midtown districts and corridors. What that means is there are kind of 5 different Midtowns that we see all around us. And we want to unearth the vibe of each of those places and really see what is sort of the connecting tissue, what are the guiding principles around this identity. We also want to address connecting the neighborhood physically and socially, and then also integrate ongoing community initiatives and partnerships that are continuous and always evolving. And all of this is going to be a part of a cohesive whole that reflects a core commitment to equitable and inclusive growth, which has become more and more the center of our work at Midtown. And so if we move to the next slide, I would love to just invite everyone to use your voice right now in the chat box. Feel free to use the chat to share your name and your relationship to Midtown. We would love to just get an idea of who's in the room. As we're doing that, I want to acknowledge that Councilwoman Phyllis Cleveland is in the house. So thank you for joining us tonight. Hi, Councilwoman.
Thanks, Joyce. Hey, Joyce.
Thanks for joining us, and others as well. And so if you could populate the chat box with your name and your relationship to Midtown, that would be great. Yep. I see Bob. Hey, Bob. We'll get an idea of who's in the room. I also want to share before we move on to some of the other content that we are going to be recording this session. We know that not everyone can make it to these Zoom meetings, and a lot of us are just sort of zoomed out. So we want to make it available to the public by recording it. And so just wanted to give everyone a heads up around that. Finally, I want to introduce you to the interface team. We worked hard to find a group that we felt that could capture sort of the essences of Midtown, the multiple essences of Midtown. And we've been really impressed by how Interface has been able to operate, especially during a pandemic, and their listening ear, that they really are learning a lot, hearing and absorbing everything that community members are saying, as well as the quantitative data that we'll be taking a look at tonight. So without further ado, I want to pass it over to Scott Page and Sarah Kellerman of Interface Studio, who will introduce their team. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, so really quickly, if you're checking out the video tiles and everyone can hear me, Maggie, give us a wave. Maggie's with the Interface team. Maria's with the Interface team. And Scott Page is the principal in charge of the Interface Studio based out of Philadelphia. So give us a wave, Scott. All right. Okay, so thank you everybody who's written in the chat box a little bit about you. Welcome everyone, we're so excited to be here. So this is our first general sort of community update. We've been doing some work in the background Throughout this presentation, we've got some interactivity. So we've got some poll questions that are going to pop up on your screen. If we are not actively inviting vocal responses, if you wouldn't mind just hitting mute, it just helps us manage a group this large on screen. Even though you're muted, you are welcome to add a question or comment into the chat box at any time. And as we go through the presentation, Maria, Maggie, and Joyce will be keeping an eye on that chat box to make sure that I pause to acknowledge questions as they come and comments as they come. So please jump in whenever you have a question. So here's what we're covering tonight. We've got kind of two main parts. First, a little project introduction. I think actually a lot of you have been engaged in the process before, but just making sure that we're all starting with the same kind of foundational understanding of why we're here and what we're talking about. The second thing we're going to cover is a quick history, but really the headlines from the data, and I'll explain more about what that means. And then the second part will be feedback for the future. And this is where, at this point in the project, we've done a lot of analysis, and that's what you're going to hear tonight. But we need to start translating these things that are rising to the surface into a vision, being able to actually articulate some strategies to achieve a vision for the future and the change that we'd like to see in the neighborhood. So diving right in, one of these equalizing slides. So for the purpose of this presentation, we wanted to make sure that it's clearly understood that when we talk about Midtown, we're talking about the place, not the organization. So what you see on the screen here is a map. It shows the boundary of Midtown as we understand it. Payne to the north, Cedar to the south, 30th to 79th, basically. It cuts down to Chester at 55th. So when we refer to Midtown throughout this hour, we are referring to this area in here. Now, that being said, throughout this project, we have embraced this idea of fuzzy boundaries because we know, and we'll share in more detail, that there isn't a huge residential population in Midtown today, and the amenities and changes that are happening in Midtown are really important to the surrounding neighborhoods too, to the Huff community, to the AJ Town community, to the Central community. And so we're embracing this idea of fuzzy boundaries because we think that there's a real opportunity to find mutually beneficial strategies and solutions as we start talking about the future. Just to put this in context, you are here. It is October, and this is our virtual community event. After this, surveys, and I'll send the link out for that, and a collaborative map will close, and we're actually shifting into thinking about the strategies. So this is a presentation of a lot of the analysis and public feedback we've gotten to date. Now, why are we here is a bigger question, and it's really because we're at this point where we have a lot of community input and a lot of data, and we need to blend these together to come up with the big ideas. And so the first part of this presentation is what we're calling the headlines, little history, and then the headlines. And the headlines are really our first presentation of that synthesis. We have created some statements that we feel represent where all of the things that we're hearing from community input, from the survey that's been live, from focus groups, from one-on-one interviews, from our pop-up event, start to really intersect with the data we've gotten from the city, data we've gotten from the county, and other data sets that we've been able to kind of crunch and flex as part of this process. And those headlines are what we use to start identifying what are the big important areas of interest that we need to keep talking about, keep moving forward, big themes. So quickly, before we jump into headlines, it's important to situate ourselves in Midtown's history as well. So as light a touch as I can in the interest of time, we just wanted to share that we did take a look back at the available data dating back through the US Census to long before 1970, but we wanted to start here and basically just show that during the 1970s, the city lost about 1 out of every 4 people. So a huge amount of population loss across the city. And the population has been in decline in the city of Cleveland for a number of years now. But when you look back at the history of Cleveland, in 1920, Cleveland was actually America's 5th biggest city. So you may have seen this map before, but if you haven't, this is a residential security map. Basically, the color coding on this map indicates, this was a map from the 1940s. It indicates where, like basically by color, how much federal backing a loan would receive a loan for a property. And the red areas shown on this map received no backing. And so what this is described, so this is basically a map illustration of what we call redlining, and it was very prevalent in Cleveland in the 40s and beyond. And this is just one of the ways that we know that racism played a huge role in Midtown's history. Racial redlining, urban renewal, blockbusting, and other divisive policies and practices throughout history have resulted in disinvestment in the area, massive inequality along racial lines, and have contributed to the loss of physical density and vibrancy in Midtown. I think the contrast of these two images is really really stark to me. So if you look, this is an aerial image of the area between 55th and I think it's like 73rd along Chester and Euclid. And you see from 1959, all of these small buildings, we've got lots of buildings fronting the street. This is what I'm describing when I say that there's been a loss of the activity along the roads and the vibrancy over time. So this is 1959. Moving forward to 2019, you can see that a lot of that small articulated development, a lot of the residential development has gone away over time. So what we know is that there are economic cycles of prosperity and oppression that shape this place, and it's critical to understand those forces in context in order to understand the neighborhood today. So we are really trying to respect Midtown's past, and it's essential that we do that to plan for its future. We know that lots of significant places have evolved and changed over time, and that's why we're looking to you, the community in and around Midtown, to help us memorialize places that are important, past and present. So I'm going to have one of my colleagues drop into the chat function. Oh, already has. A map to the collaborative map. And this map is a tool that we have live, and it's been live for about 2 months now, where you can add significant places and your own stories, ideas and issues or concerns that you find in and around Midtown. And this is one of the ways that we're trying to sort of build a collective memory of this place. So please, as you're listening to this presentation, take a minute to open up another browser window and take a look at that. Also, the community survey, if you have not taken it, is live and will remain live for a little bit into November. So you've got another week or two on that one. But if you haven't taken it, please do. It only takes a few minutes. Great to do in the background.
Hey, Sarah.
I'm droning on.
Hey, Sarah, sorry to interrupt you. I know you're kind of in the middle of your flow. I think there's a notification that keeps going off that is coming through our speakers. I don't know if that's the case. Yeah. Okay. But feel free to carry on if it's not an easy fix.
Okay, I turned off my computer sound, so hopefully that doesn't, did you just hear it?
No.
Okay, then I think I fixed it. Sorry about that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, sorry. The soundtrack of our lives. Okay, so getting into these headlines, and like I said, this is where this community feedback, including the comments that we've received on the collaborative map, start to really intersect with the data analysis that we've done behind the scenes. And so I'm going to move quickly through this, but there are a couple points where we're going to do a little trivia question before we show you the results of the data analysis. So there are 8 headlines that we present. Again, please ask questions in the chat function at any time. We will have an opportunity at the end to look at a screen that has all 8 headlines on it. So if you start to get lost, we'll regroup in just a minute. So what did we learn from the data? The first headline is Midtown doesn't have a single identity. It's a patchwork. And because of this, people identify with Midtown in different ways. From a lot of the conversations that we had with different stakeholders, residents, business owners, what have you, people are asking, what does Midtown do for me? It's not in defense of a particular, vibe or something about, preserving the Midtown as it is today. People see Midtown in relation to their place of work, their home, or the larger kind of community that they identify with. And so this is true for near neighbors, right? So residents of Asiatown, are asking, am I a resident of Midtown? What even is this place? And then it's also in conversations with, the business, the manufacturing community, and stakeholders in sort of the health tech space. These different businesses also have different needs and are asking the same question: what can Midtown do for me? So Midtown doesn't have a single identity. It's a patchwork, is also sort of visualized, if you will, in the land use map. You can see this is a land use breakdown of the larger area. And these are kind of the big categories: residential, commercial, mixed use, industrial. If you look at the breakdown for the larger area, so everything you can see in this map, you see it's like 40% industrial, that's this purple, 26% commercial. We broke it down a little bit tighter, into a little bit finer, into a couple additional categories. So adding in parking, adding in vacant land and vacant buildings. And you can see there's a real mix. Land use across the landscape of Midtown is very mixed. And that is also contributing to that feeling that it's a patchwork, that there isn't one node that's a center or a gathering point for everyone. There are bits of identity vibe, as Joyce said, that's coming, kind of coming to the surface in different areas. Asiatown definitely has its own branding. I think the whole health tech scene is really gaining some momentum. You're seeing a lot more businesses opening and wanting to locate in Midtown. And then there's also a lot of energy coming from the Huff community and people who are interested in respecting Midtown's history, like celebrating the legacy of Leo's Casino. And this actually just happened last week at the ACLU building. There was a wheat paste mural going in, Justice is in our DNA. So if you haven't seen that as you're going through, that is now installed. The second headline is Midtown is the intersection of diverse communities. So through many conversations, we heard things like Midtown doesn't feel like a neighborhood because there aren't actually any people there. Or how do we connect better to the Huff neighborhood on the other, how do we better connect Huff neighborhood to the other side of Euclid? And there's really an emphasis on arts and celebrating existing community assets. I think one of the most dramatic images that illustrates this point is this. This is a map showing population density by race in 3 categories: Asian, Black or African American, and white. And you can see all of these dots represent residential density, and we've moved them on top of the residential properties, which is why Midtown looks like pretty empty. It's because there aren't that many residential properties kind of throughout the middle of Midtown, compared to Huff, where it's a very larger residential base. But you can also see that the Huff community, Central Fairfax, are majority Black, whereas in Asiatown you see a much higher percentage of Asian population. But I think the biggest headline here is that Midtown is right in between everything. It has this wonderful opportunity to be the intersection of all of these communities. We unpacked the data about race and ethnicity a little bit more. And there's, on this slide, you see from the bottom, you have just Midtown area. So that's that boundary on the maps that we've looked at in the last minute or so. But we also look at Midtown in the context of the near neighborhoods. So that's data that's showing Midtown, Central, Fairfax, Huff, and St. Clair Superior, kind of up to the water. And you see in both of those geographic areas, the data from the US Census shows that the population is majority Black, 71%, in the case of the smaller Midtown geography. And that there's also a higher proportion of Black and Asian residents than the city or the county percentages. Also note that for the city of Cleveland, the whole city, the Asian population is growing. It grew by about 27% between 2010 and 2018 were the 2 data sets we were using here. So the questions for the future, as we start to kind of unpack this and think about what's next, it's how do you reinforce the neighborhood connections? What are the right streets that are, the real pathways, the real connections? How can we build on the energy that exists along some of those connections? And where do we need to create new energy through design features, programming, lighting, all kinds of things? Headline 3. All stakeholders agree that Midtown's location is its biggest asset. And there was really nobody arguing with this idea. So Midtown is convenient. It's close to downtown. There's access to the highway is really easy, which is great for local businesses. And you've got the health line running right through the center. And from the health line, you can connect to buses and other transit options that can get you pretty much anywhere in the city. I think this is reinforced by looking at how connected Midtown is to other job centers. So it's not just businesses in Midtown and being able to access them, but Midtown is convenient to job clusters in University Circle. The Cleveland Clinic is a huge employer, and obviously everything downtown. When you look at this in terms of sort of employee travel dynamics, you see that in this map, this is where Midtown employees live. So people who live across Cleveland, across the region even, who come to Midtown because that's their place of employment. So you can see it's a really broad mix, and the majority of people traveling to Midtown for their work are driving. And so driving and parking in Midtown is easy, it's convenient, and you don't see much spatial limitation of where people are coming from because, you know, they don't feel like they can access Midtown. It is really convenient. Looking at it the other way, where do Midtown residents work? So this is where do people who live, who sleep at night in Midtown, where do they go during the day for their jobs? And you do see it follows those job or employment clusters on that first map. So you see a lot of people going downtown, you see a lot of people going to University Circle, closer to Cleveland Clinic, which gets us to headline 4. So there's a need to focus on improving community health outcomes. We had lots of really wonderful discussions with residents and many stakeholders about health and wellness and the significance of creating a healthy community, creating spaces where people can feel safe and healthy, making sure there's access to good food, all of these different ways that physical environment can reinforce personal and community health and well-being. I wanted to share a couple metrics. So we have medical data, health data is, it's tough because there are a lot of regulations around what can be shared and at what scale you can share that data, rightfully so, because you're protecting people's privacy. But there are some data sets that are available at the scale of Midtown and the near neighborhoods. And these are sort of what we gleaned from that analysis. It's that Midtown and the near neighborhoods, so looking at that larger geography, including the near neighborhoods, are slightly more likely to smoke cigarettes, have comparable rates of asthma in adults as the city and county, but are more likely to be overweight or obese than the city and county stats, and are more likely to have high blood pressure and diabetes. And I think most notably at the bottom here, it says infant mortality rate and incidence of children with elevated lead levels in Midtown are consistent with Cleveland and the county rates, but they're both higher than the national averages. So what does this tell us? This tells us that the physical spaces in Midtown could do more to support community health and wellness. Another way to kind of come at this idea is by looking at the sheer number of parks and open spaces that exist or are available to families, people, individuals that live around Midtown today. We've got Dunham Tavern, which is currently under a going through a master planning process, which is going to totally change what kind of community spaces are available. And I'll share a link about that at the very end of the presentation so you can find out more. But the only other park within Midtown's boundary here is Colonel Charles Young Park. And every park is important, but this park is at a very busy intersection. It's sort of difficult to get to. So I think there's a lot of questions. So here's Dunham Tavern. Questions for, how can these parks and open spaces, how can we find more opportunities for parks and open spaces? And how can we make the spaces that exist work harder for the people who want to use them? I just also wanted to share that just outside of our boundary in Midtown is this East 69th Street Community Garden. We've heard through several comments that, maybe community gardening space is a way to bring the community together and reinforce access to healthy foods. So as we move forward, I think the point of all of this is if you drive around Midtown, you see green, you see open, there are places where there's grass and trees and shade, but they
yeah.
aren't places that welcome you into the green space or offer activities in that area. So how can we make these green spaces work harder in the future? How can we make them more meaningful and contribute more to growing that sense of community in Midtown? The next headline is Midtown needs to be a pipeline for jobs that are accessible to people in the local area. We heard this a lot of different ways, but jobs are incredibly important now more than ever. Unfortunately, a lot of the jobs data metrics that tell us about jobs, you know, the economic health of an area, don't reflect the changes that have brought that COVID has brought, which are largely negative. And as we heard in lots of conversations, people need jobs. People need jobs today, but they also need jobs that allow them to advance and find long-term employment at a livable wage with, you know, opportunities for advancement. So it's both immediate and it's long-term, which is you know, the start of a conversation about workforce training programs. So now our first Midtown trivia. A question is going to pop up on your screens. So you'll select the answer, but the question is, what is the employment rate? It's a percentage for Midtown and the surrounding neighborhoods. And this is the 2018 rate. As I said, it doesn't reflect the impact of COVID. And just as a hint, the unemployment rate for the United States in 2018 was 5%. Oops.
I didn't see the poll yet.
Did it not pop up?
I think
Popped up for
because we're
me.
sharing host privileges, Joyce. It might not come
Oh.
up for you. Does everyone else see the poll?
Okay.
Did everyone else see the poll?
I've got a lot of responses. We got 36 of 45.
Oh, wow. Okay, I guess it's just me then.
How can I show the responses?
Well, we've got 6 more people if they're going to vote. Otherwise, we can end it and share out the results.
Okay.
All right. Any more responses trickling in? We're at 41 of 45.
Let's go for it. All right, most popular response was 12%, second to 18%. So the actual answer was, sorry. Maggie, what was the actual answer?
26%.
26%, 26%. So income and health, income and wealth statistics related to the community are come from a couple different data sets as well. But what we saw when we started looking at Midtown compared to the city, compared to the county, is that Midtown households have relatively high unemployment, 26% compared to the national average of 5% in 2018. So that's dramatic, that's important. They've also got a lower median income than the surrounding areas, the city and the county. Renters are more likely to be cost burdened, and that means that more than 30% of the household income is going towards housing expenses. There's lower educational attainment on average. That's the bar chart in the bottom right of this slide. There's less access to vehicles and a higher proportion of non-family households. And so the important thing here is that all of these have ripple effects in family dynamics and challenges that face a community, particularly when you start talking about workforce dynamics. And so what do we do with this? How are we thinking about this? When we move forward, what we need is not just to talk about a need for a pipeline for jobs, but also acknowledgement that there's nuance in that job pipeline, and to figure out ways to really kind of explain and unpack and identify ways to create more meaningful access to jobs for people who live in the area. The graphic that's on the screen right now is just sort of illustrating how different jobs have sort of hierarchies of skills and barriers to entry for people who are pursuing employment. On the top, the columns that you see are, you think of them as sort of representative of different industries, and across the horizontal rows are sort of the job hierarchy, with the highest paid and highest barrier to entry at the top, going down to the bottom. What's important is that below a certain level, in a lot of industries, it's considered a non-core function jobs. And those are janitorial staff, food service, shipping and receiving, drivers, mechanics, that sort of thing. And more often, these positions are being contracted out to third-party companies that help provide staffing at those levels. And what is important about that is when you're talking about getting people into entry-level jobs with an opportunity for advancement, you have to move beyond the contracted positions. And so there's a different pipeline, right? There's a different workforce training strategy, and there's different needs to make sure that people are getting into those jobs with living wage and opportunities for benefits and advancement. Headline 6 of 8, Midtown has housing, but it's not the center of any single community. So one of the really wonderful quotes that we received was that equitable development means something else now than it did a decade ago. It has more variety, more color, and more texture. We've got another question for you. So this question is, what percentage of Midtown's land area is residential? Meaning that the residential properties have anything with a single family home, a duplex, townhouses, apartments, condos, any kind of format of residential. I meant to play this the first time. Maggie, how are we doing on responses?
We are at 39, so last call. Anyone else wants to vote really quick? All right, let's see what you guys think.
7%. And you are correct. Only 7% of Midtown's land area is dedicated to residential use today. Based on our analysis, there are about 1,165 housing units to be exact, and about 75% of them are apartments. We also looked at property turnover, meaning the recent sales of residential properties in the area. And you can see that there just hasn't been that much turnover in the Midtown area compared to the surrounding communities. There's a relatively little inventory of rental and for sale units. There's also, we found, basically different micro markets when it comes to residential property in Midtown. We found sort of 3 distinct micro markets. There's the pocket of residential around Asiatown. There's the residential areas that are further east, so closer to East 79th Street. And then there's a couple oddball residential areas kind of throughout the rest of Midtown. There is some new development. So this is one Midtown that's currently under construction. So when we start to think about housing, it's how do we incentivize the type of residential development that is going to make Midtown actually feel like a neighborhood in its own right, or will help spur the right kind of development in your neighborhoods, or at least be compatible and there's a word that I have forgotten that's not top of mind right now, but basically how do we coordinate residential development? How do we make sure that it's aligned with the goals of the nearby communities, so that when new residential properties come online in the Midtown area, it's not to the detriment of the surrounding communities, it's actually in coordination with them, to the benefit of the greater sort of Midtown Huff Central Fairfax, and Asiatown, kind of broader area. Headline 7, there isn't a place that brings people together. Now, there's a little aside here because I think that most people we've spoken with agree that Dave's is kind of that place that brings the community together, but there isn't a big open space. There isn't a community gathering space that isn't a grocery store. And this is something that's needed, and it's not needed just to be there physically. It needs it to be bold. It needs to make a statement. It's sorely needed. So we heard lots and lots of comments describing the need for a space for events, space for play, spaces to draw young people. And there's an articulation in a lot of these conversations that we're trying to draw young people back. So what we wanted to look at was, are there segments of Midtown that have really active frontages? What are we working with as a start to try to identify what are those nodes where it might make sense to create a bigger gathering space? So what we did was we broke down the street frontage for all of the properties in Midtown. We kind of imagine walking along the sidewalk, and we gave it kind of a grade. The categories were active, and that means that it's well maintained, there's sidewalks, it's got an active business. Then privately active, meaning there's something there, but it's not necessarily a public use. You couldn't just walk in, but it's attractive, or there's clearly something operating inside. They're somewhat active, and this is where you've got an entrance to an active business, but it's through a parking lot. It's kind of like one step removed, somewhat active, and then inactive. And this is where we're looking at garage doors, vacant lots, blank walls, no windows, or underutilized parcels. So another trivia question: what percentage of Midtown's street frontage is active today? I'm going to scroll back to this one so you can kind of see the definitions again as you answer. All right, Maggie, how are we looking?
Well, we've got 5% coming in first. That was the most popular answer, trailed by 19 and 12.
All right. So the answer, 12%. So when this is a map that basically shows a visualization of that analysis of walking all of the streets in Midtown and grading the frontage of the property that you were next to. So the blue all across this map, that's active, and all together that makes up 12% of the frontage in Midtown. You see green is the 4%, somewhat active is 27%, but there's a lot of inactive property in Midtown.
Sarah, I'm still seeing the street frontage slide unless it's just me and my screen is frozen.
Yeah, I'm stuck on that one too.
I must have done something. Sorry, here we go. How about now? All right, so now you see the 12%. You see the blue lines, which are active, green are privately active, and you see those are kind of clustered through the residential areas. But 57% of the street frontage in Midtown, we categorized as inactive. And that means that along those segments, you don't feel a sense of place. You don't feel activity or energy coming from nearby businesses. You might even feel sort of alone or exposed because the environment around you is not providing that kind of welcoming feel that makes you feel like there's some there. Now, Midtown Inc., the organization, is already working to correct some of this, and that's through these wayfinding efforts. You've seen the banner signs around Asiatown, as well as the utility box wraps, all of these little interventions that help make it feel like you are in a place that is loved, that is recognized, even if the businesses around you and the storefronts around you aren't entirely full. There's also larger events, continuing despite COVID, and new art installations. This is the newest one on the side of the Joyce. What is the name of the grocery store? Golden.
It's Good Harvest in Asia Town.
Harvest. Good Harvest in Asia Town. If you haven't seen it, it's really beautiful. This was a photo taken on last Saturday. So I think they're probably finished with it now. But big, bold events like this one are going to make all the difference when we're sort of creating and activating spaces in and around Midtown. And I really leaned on this idea that it's been articulated that we're trying to bring young people back, trying to incentivize the development and the creation of these spaces to make Midtown appeal to more young people. But I want to acknowledge that in the data, Midtown's median age is actually younger than the surrounding neighborhoods and the city and the county. And the population under 18, so the young population, has grown 24% from 2010 to 2018. Now there's a margin of error because we're looking at a small area, but all suffice to say, there are already young people, there are already young families living in and around Midtown. And investment in these spaces, in a community gathering space, in open space, and play lots, are of value to the community that already exists. It's not just a speculative investment. And the last headline is Midtown is designed to be a pass-through. But the more important point here is that it can be redesigned. We heard from people that it's walkable, but it's not nice, quote, that it doesn't necessarily feel safe in all the corners. We did a quick analysis looking at the connectivity, and you really see it when you break down the streets, showing only north and south here. And then the next slide shows east and west, and you just see the longevity and how easy it is to get from east to west, and how much more challenging it might be to get from north to south over a longer distance. There's these breaks and jogs in the street network. When you look at it at a more micro scale, we did a walk shed analysis from some of the BRT transit stations. And in this orange hatch, this is where you could walk from a station within a quarter mile. And the brighter orange is within an eighth of a mile. And you see that in these nodes where there's actually the most activity, there's also the most limitation on some sides of the street of how far you can walk. And so looking at these different sort of metrics and ways to think about access and walkability and where investment might be most felt, it might be most effective to target investment. These are kind of all the things that we're doing and layering at this point in the process. And when you look at individual streets, the point is, even more evident. So this is Payne Avenue. Payne Avenue is 58 feet across. It's got 4 travel lanes and 2 parking lanes. That's just a lot of street. It's a big street for the amount of traffic that goes down it. So when we look at something like this, we see a great opportunity. Where are the places we can extend sidewalks, make it easier to cross, and make it feel like a smaller street in a more tame environment? Whereas,
I have a question for you.
Sure.
I'm Cindy. I met you at the Dave's parking lot. I remember.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited about the plans that Midtown has for the community. They're really brilliant. My husband read an article about it. But what I would like to ask is the question that I asked you at the parking lot. All the development is beautiful, but generally the neighborhood residents are not really left with anything except for the beautiful buildings and things like that. What is the possibility of an organization like Midtown collaborating with grassroots organizations such as myself? I'm Cindy from the BC Block Club. We're doing a solar project. Carolyn Allen's group, which is doing a magnificent, I see you, Carolyn, a magnificent project that's coming up. That we could form subsidiary companies from the development companies to bring back funds directly to the neighborhoods, dispersed in accordance to the neighborhood's needs. it could be towards healthcare, it could be toward energy and education. This is beautiful. Carolyn and I have been around for a long time, and we are so excited. I am like so excited to be a part of this. That's all I have to say. If you could, and if this is not the platform to talk to it, you can call me later. Okay.
No, thank you so much for voicing that. And I think the answer to your question is twofold. First, it's stay tuned, right? Because recommendations like that will come out of this planning effort. But if we're talking about order of operations, where we are in the process right now is defining what those priorities are. And then the different ways that implementation could achieve them, over what time frame, including what stakeholders or community groups, the different ways to actually get it done. We need to figure out what the big vision is, what the priorities are, and then we take the next step, which is talking about implementation and strategies. So we were like right here, defining the most important part at the top of the hill, and then we got to coast back down and start to figure out how to actually get it done. And that's where it comes back to this idea that we are creating this plan for the next 5 years. The big vision is for much longer than that. But when we walk away at the end of this project effort, we will have actionable strategies that start to achieve those goals for the next 5 years outlined. Thank you for your question. I am going to skip the next trivia question in the interest of time, but it was, how wide is Chester Avenue? And I think the answer everyone can agree is it's too wide. But in actuality, it's 88 feet wide, which is too wide. The other thing that we heard about Chester through the planning process is that it's a highway. There's never any traffic. It never gets backed up. And we're certainly not suggesting that we need streets to get backed up, but they shouldn't be so wide open that people feel like they don't need to acknowledge, speed limits or make it unsafe feeling to cross the street. So, breaking down Chester Avenue as a barrier between the Huff community in particular and sort of the central core of Midtown east of 55th is definitely a point of discussion for this plan. And then otherwise, it's just looking at quality improvements. There's a whole range of kind of opportunities or issues depending on where you are in Midtown. Some of them are physical infrastructure improvements, some of them more lighting. There's been a lot of effort to improve wayfinding, which I think is making a really big difference along some of the major pathways. So I'm going to take a quick pause. This is the set of 8 headlines. This is everything I just walked through on one really text-heavy slide. We have 2 more quick questions that get into kind of the articulation of the vision. But I wanted to just hit pause for a second and see if there are any more questions and comments that we can respond to before we move forward. Okay. All right. If there are no questions, I'm going to keep moving. So we're now officially in the second part of the presentation, running just a little bit behind, but I'll go as quick as I can. And this is part 2 about the vision. Where are we going from here? To Cindy's point, where do we go from here? So a couple questions for you. There have been a lot of ideas and articulations of sort of what the future might hold for Midtown. But we're starting to hear similar themes, similar words, similar ideas. And if we can start making some of these words and phrases really rise to the surface, then we can pin down what is that real vision for Midtown. And so what I'd like for you to do is look at this list and pick what you think are your top 3 from this list that would be words or ideas for your future vision of Midtown. If you don't feel that your words or phrases, the way that you would articulate the vision, is represented in this list, please feel welcome to only respond with 1 or 2 choices, and then share in the chat function what you think is missing.
Sarah, it's only pick 1.
It's only letting you pick 1. Maggie, it's only letting us pick 1.
That shouldn't have happened, but if it might be my error, it's probably my error. Sorry about that.
All right, so pick your favorite and then write in the chat function if there's anything that we missed.
Yes.
This is an excellent narrowing exercise.
Yes, really, really tough stuff.
My apologies. You are supposed to pick 3, but it's okay. Top words only.
All right, let's see some responses. Wow, walkable and accessible got a few votes. Okay, inclusive is up there, innovative, little bit of everything. That's sort of the subtitle of this project, just like a little bit of everything. All right, so where do we take that? We start to layer, feedback from an activity like this with all of the other things that we're hearing. And what we will do is draft a vision statement. And that vision statement will come back to you all, probably in virtual form, based on what's happening across the country with the COVID, second wave of COVID. But you'll hopefully see the ideas that were important to you reflected in that vision for you to respond to. The next thing I'm really excited to share are some photos from the pop-up event that we had. So we were at Dave's last Friday and Saturday, and we were encouraging everyone to take the survey, which if you haven't, that link was in the chat box, but maybe we'll just post it one more time in case you haven't had a chance to take it yet. But we also asked people to use this chalkboard to describe their big vision or their big idea for Midtown. And you can see the responses really range, but we heard a lot of people asking for something to be done with vacant properties, fix them, rent them, something to address crime or perceived crime in the area. And then a lot of requests for open space, ideas for big parks. I'm gonna flip to this next one. Young and old looking for places to play, a movie theater, things to do, job training. So you see the community really echoing and intersecting with all of those sort of data and metrics. You can see how it's sort of all coming together. And so now the last and closing question for the meeting tonight is, what's your big idea for Midtown? I'm not going to make you write it on a chalkboard because we didn't have time to mail everybody a chalkboard to take a picture with. But if you could use the chat function, we would love to hear what your big idea is for Midtown. On the screen are typed versions of some of the things that we heard while we were at Dave's.
Or if anyone wants to second a big idea that you see on the screen, feel free to put that in the chat.
Definitely.
There was a question from from Kim Scott. Was the same question asked to the people that work in Midtown? Oh, I hear it. What do they want to see that would make them spend more time outside of working?
So the question was, what did we ask, or what should we ask?
Did we ask a similar question? Oh,
Right.
Go ahead, Kim.
If you ask that same question of the people that actually work in Midtown as opposed to the people that live or I guess shop around there, what do they want to see? And I guess moreover, what would they want to see that would cause them to spend more time there outside of work? So in other words, if you're getting off of work, would you hang out in Midtown if there were something to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have that to share on the screen right this second, but in our survey, we had a different string of questions for people who told us that they work in Midtown. And at the last count online, we had 165 surveys, but we had about 100 people fill out surveys while we were with them at Dave's. And so we now have a much more robust set of data reflecting community responses that also fall into that category. And the questions that we were asking, I think it was, what do you like most? What do you dislike most? What's the single biggest improvement needed for the area? And because we asked some of those sort of demographic sorting questions, we can see if that response is coming from someone who lives, works, plays, visits Midtown. So we will be able to share that once we close the survey.
We would also welcome folks, if you have employees of your own, or if you are an employee, to fill out that survey, because I think we're always looking for more feedback, particularly for the business owners on the line.
Thank you. So I'm going to read out a few, of the things that came into the chat. So Paul Deutsch, housing for diverse income groups. Let's see, Carrie Carpenter, great question about after work. Oh, an attaboy for Kim Scott. Let's see, Carolyn Allen, restaurants that draw families. Cindy, a beautiful community, a way to leave a legacy for our families that's worth something. Beautiful. Ron Fuqua, beautiful environment. Lots of great ideas. So if anything else comes to mind before we close, keep using that chat function, or feel free to email anyone from the project team. Our last note here, and we did want to end as close to 6 as we could, because we know there's a Ward 7 meeting, and we want to respect and encourage everyone's ability to participate in that meeting as well. But I want to share, and we'll put it in the chat function as well, that in addition to our project and the ways that you can get involved in the Midtown Neighborhood Vision Plan, there are other planning efforts underway, actually a ton of them, that are touching Midtown and the near neighborhoods. And the Asiatown Vision Plan is currently underway, and that's under, that's a Midtown Inc. initiative. There's also the Dunham Tavern Master Plan, and I mentioned that early in the presentation, but they've got a whole visualization of what the future of Dunham Tavern's grounds might look like. And then there's also a plan called Barrier Free Cleveland, and that is an analysis looking at walkability and barriers to access, physical barriers to access for Midtown and the surrounding community and communities across Cleveland. So we'll drop links to those efforts and where you can go to get more information, but it's our job in Midtown as the planners working on this project to try to keep an eye on all of these other planning initiatives and figure out how we can weave in all of this effort into one big, beautiful vision and plan. But if you have individual curiosity, there are upcoming events and more information about all of those. So that's it for us. I will hang on for a couple minutes. If anybody has questions or wants to chat about anything that they saw, I'm happy to hang on, and we really, really appreciate your time today, your willingness to continue staying connected to this project, and you'll hear from us again soon.
Thank you all, and I'm about to drop the Ward 7 meeting for those who are Ward 7 residents or interested stakeholders into the chat. So, and there's a lot of chats coming up with details about the other plans that are happening.
Thank you all for allowing me to sit in on this. It's very good. So with the Ward 7 meeting, is that a different Zoom connect?
It is a different Zoom.
Okay, guys. All right, take care. I'm out.
Okay, bye,
Bye-bye.
Ron. Good to see you.
You too now.
Are there others who have comments or questions, happy to stay on the line to entertain those. And also, if there were headlines that really resonated with you, or if you had an idea about the headlines, would love to hear from you on that.
Does anyone have a link for more information about the Barrier-Free Cleveland program?
Terry, oh, she's not on the line anymore. So,
We have it. 1 second.
okay.
I think it was in.
Yes, I will copy it over in the chat box. It's just that the chat box has a word
limit.
Yeah, so it got cut in half. I'll put it right there. Thanks,
Okay,
Ellen.
thank you.
Is there any more information on that rail trail by Cornell Studios that I see on the map?
So currently, we do not have a public document. It is a highly conceptual trail right now that Cornell University planning and architecture students came up with. I'm trying to think if there are any documents that we should be able to show. You can leave your email for me in the chat and I can share more with you, but it's still sort of in the beginning stages. And so I feel like we're not quite yet ready to bring it to the community just because it's still so squishy and not quite sure all the details yet. I'm sorry, that was a very not great answer to your question, Tyler.
I understand. It's good enough though.
Yeah, stay tuned. They just finished.
Beverly, what did you think?
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just asking if Ms. Beverly, what did you think, Ms. Beverly? What about the headlines?
I forget to unmute all the time. It was interesting. Yeah, it was good. It's a lot going on. In the next 5 years, I wonder how we're gonna be able to recognize Euclid Avenue.
In a good way.
Yes, yes. With everything changing and different things coming and going, so I just want to see it.
Absolutely. Does anyone else on the line have questions for us or thoughts they'd like to share? Arlene, Joyce, Julian?
Oh, it's 6 o'clock. Oh, it's after 6 o'clock.
Yeah, I don't have much else to share. Please stay in touch. We'll be sending out more information through our e-newsletter. Bye, Ms. Beverly, and
Bye.
everything.
It was 6
And
o'clock. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Good.
Have a
Okay.
good one.
Bye, everybody.